Chapter 1394. To Lu Ye's slight disappointment, Tang Jun shook his head and said, "I've never heard of it. As you know, once we leave our domain, the direction radiates in all directions. Although I've been to a few nearby galaxies, I dare not say that I know everything about Jade Conch. Perhaps I know more about Jade Conch domain." Jade Conch Galaxy was named after the Jade Conch domain. It was the well-deserved leader of the galaxy. Although there was no sunlight, there were many moon blossoms. It was much stronger than the old man's Qingli Dao domain. The old man sighed again. In the end, our galaxy is still out of touch with the mainstream of the universe. I didn't think much of it before, but after coming to the Wanxiang Sea, I realized that we're still frogs in a well. Holding the jade slip in his hand, he looked at Lu Yi and asked, "What do you plan to do?" "Go back." Lu Yi said matter-of-factly. He didn't know the location of Jade Conch Galaxy before, but now that he knew, he had to go back. It wasn't that he missed his hometown. He hadn't been out for long, so he didn't miss it. What he considered was to go back first and figure out the path. In this way, even if the insect path couldn't be formed in the future, if the cultivators of this domain wanted to come to the Wanxiang Sea, they could fly over directly. If this domain wanted to develop and grow, it wouldn't work if they just admired themselves. They had to connect with the mainstream of the universe. The Wanxiang Galaxy was a good place and also an opportunity. Of course, the journey across two galaxies wouldn't be short. Even though Lu Yi had a starboat now, it would definitely take 3 to 5 years. "We should go back." Tang Jun nodded. "Do you want to go back or should I?" Lu Yi was stunned. "You don't want to go back?" Tang Jun said, "Of course. I'm old and don't have many years left to live. Even if I die, I don't want to be buried in a foreign land. I still hope to return to my roots. But first of all, we can't tell if this information is accurate. If it's wrong, we'll just be wasting our time if we go back together. Another possibility is that this information is accurate and we can return to Jade Conch. We don't have to go back together. One will go and figure out the path, and the other will stay and develop here. When the cultivators of our two domains come here in the future, we can more or less take care of them." It had to be said that the old man's consideration was comprehensive. When Lu Yi received the jade slip, he only wanted to return to Jade Conch Galaxy. Now that she heard what he said, she indeed felt that the best arrangement was for one to stay and one to leave. "I'll go. You stay." Lu Yi immediately made his decision. In the end, the 9 provinces was still a little weak. Moreover, Lu Yi did not want to tell others about the specific location of the 9 provinces, not even Tang Jun. In this old man's mind, he was just a cultivator from the Wuxia continent. Therefore, if one of them had to go back, he would be the best choice. Tang Jun was shrewd with age. How could he not see Lu Ye's misgivings? He nodded and said, "Then we'll arrange it that way. But how are you going to enter the Sky Spill Galaxy?" Normally, using the insect path was the only way. They couldn't just fly over. The Sky Spill star system had a stable insect path that led directly to the Myriad Phenomenon star system. Otherwise, there wouldn't be cultivators from the Sky Spill star system here. Cultivators from this galaxy could naturally enter and exit the insect passage as they pleased, but if they were not from this galaxy, they would need someone to be their guarantor. This was because there were powerhouses from the Sky Spill star system guarding the two ends of the insect path. If one barged in without a guarantor, they would die in vain. Basically, every galaxy's insect path was guarded by a local powerhouse. One reason was to prevent the local cultivators from being ambushed when they entered the Myriad Phenomenon star system. Another reason was to prevent people from using the insect path to invade the local galaxy. If one day, the Jade Conch Galaxy's insect path stabilized and allowed people to pass through safely, the Jade Conch Galaxy would also need to dispatch powerhouses to guard the entrances and exits of the insect path. All cultivators entering and exiting the insect path would have to be checked before they could pass through. Lu Yi did not have much interaction with people from the Sky Spill star system, nor did he know any cultivators from the Sky Spill star system. Naturally, there was no one to vouch for him. "Do you have a way?" Lu Yi asked. Tang Jun shook his head. "This old man is powerless." "Then I'll think of something myself." Looking up at the old man, Lu Ye's eyelids drooped. He said, "Old Tang, this journey will take at least a few years. The journey is not safe. Do you have anything you can sponsor? For example, a planetary boat, a treasure of suppressing realms, or something like that?" Tang Jun squinted at him. "I've already given you my storage ring. What else do you want? Besides, don't you have the red talisman with you? Even if Yu Yao bullies you, so what? You can kill the red talisman of the dwarf clan." Lu Yi said, "You can't say that. You said it yourself that you don't have many years left to live. If you burp before I come back, won't your things benefit others? We're from the same galaxy after all. Give me your inheritance and I'll bring it back to the Green Dawn Dao world. It can be considered as passing it on." Tang Jun snorted. "Don't worry, I won't die before you come back. You should at least give me some travel expenses. I don't have much time to search for spiritual jades along the way. I don't have any left." The old man was speechless. This was the first time he heard of travel expenses. However, if Li Taibai could really return to Jade Conch, the Green Dawn Dao world would need him to inform them. He took out a storage ring and handed it to Lu Yi. "I don't have any more. Take it or leave it. I don't dare to refuse a gift from an elder. How can I not take it?" Lu Yi took the storage ring and looked at it. There were less than 2,000 spiritual jades in it. The old man was quite generous. Lu Yi silently remembered this favor. "I'll leave you a jade slip. When you return to Jade Conch, pass it to Wuxia when you go to the Green Dawn Dao world. He will cooperate with you." Tang Jun handed him another jade slip. Wuxia was the third Yu Yao in the Green Dawn Dao world. Lu Yi took it and put it away solemnly. "Is there anything else you want to say?" Tang Jun looked at him with a serious expression. "Don't die on the way." The world was unpredictable. The old man and the young man who used to be enemies were now in a foreign place. Now that they were in the same boat, Tang Jun naturally hoped that Lu Ye's journey would go as smoothly as possible. Lu Yi jumped up and laughed. "Don't die before I come back." How to enter the Sky Spill star system was a problem. The most appropriate method was naturally to befriend a cultivator from the Sky Spill star system, gain their trust, and have them act as a guarantor. Then, they would be able to enter safely. However, these cultivators from the various star systems did not have their origins engraved on their foreheads, so how would Lu Yi know who was from the Sky Spill star system? Asking the Plenitude Commerce Hall for information was one way. However, Lu Yi was reluctant to pay 1,000 spiritual jades for a piece of information. Moreover, even if he did find a Sky Spill cultivator, why would he make friends with him and trust him? He could also try his luck at the worm path that led to Sky Spill. There must be a strong cultivator from Yu Yao guarding there. If he told them his intention honestly and said that he wanted to borrow the Sky Spill path, it might work. However, it was more likely that he would be rejected. After thinking about it, there was only one way. Zhaolai Island. Lu Yi had stayed at Zhaolai Island for a few days. The recruitment there was not only about the various spiritual islands recruiting guards, but also about other kinds of information, including the transportation of resources. The Plenitude Ocean had frequent transactions. The amount of resources it took in every day was enormous. Some people brought local specialties here to sell, while others bought resources here and sent them back to their homeworld. The journey was not necessarily peaceful. There were all kinds of people here. When Lu Yi had just arrived at the Plenitude Galaxy, he had even been robbed by a group of people. Therefore, if there was a need to transport resources, someone would be needed to escort them. If there were enough people in their homeworld, they naturally did not need to hire anyone. If there were not enough, they could only come to Zhaolai Island to find someone. Lu Yi wanted to come here to see if there were any Sky Spill cultivators recruiting people. The probability was not high, but it was better than trying his luck with Yu Yao. He had thought that even if there was hope, it would take a long time. If there was no other way, he could only ask the Plenitude Commerce Hall for information and find a Sky Spill cultivator to make friends with, who knew that in less than half a day after arriving at Zhaolai Island, he would find the recruitment information he needed on a jade board. Just as he had expected, they needed to recruit a few people to escort a batch of resources back to a certain realm in the Sky Spill Galaxy. Then, they would escort another batch of resources back to the Plenitude Ocean. A middle-aged man stood beside the jade board. He had not activated his spirit power, so Lu Yi could not tell his cultivation level. However, he was probably a Star Mansion cultivator. Lu Yi stepped forward, cupped his fists, and said, "Brother, please." The middle-aged man sized Lu Yi up and said directly, "One round trip is 1,500 jade pieces. 500 is the deposit, and 1,000 is the balance. If you are satisfied, we can talk. If you are not, please leave." 1,500 jade pieces was not a low price. A round trip would take at least 4 to 5 months. On average, it would be 300 to 400 spirit jades per month. It was higher than the monthly salary of ordinary spiritual islands recruiting guards. After all, the risks in space were high. Lu Yi had seen a lot of recruitment information before. He knew that this price was fair. Moreover, he was not here for spirit jades. He nodded immediately. "Sure." Lu Yi discussed some details with the middle-aged man. They exchanged musical notes and agreed to call him when they were about to depart. Then, Lu Yi left Zhaolai Island. This mission required a round trip. In other words, even if Lu Yi went to the Sky Spill Galaxy, he would have to come back. This was not consistent with his planned itinerary. Even if he entered the Sky Spill Galaxy, he would not be able to shake off the middle-aged man and act alone. This would easily arouse the middle-aged man's hostility. In the future, it would not be easy for the people of the Jade Conch Galaxy to borrow the Sky Spill Galaxy. Lu Yi planned to use these few months to build a good relationship with the middle-aged man. If he could get the middle-aged man to vouch for him, he would be familiar with Yu Yao, who was guarding the insect path. Then, everything else would not be a problem. The middle-aged man did not make Lu Yi wait for too long. He received a message 2 days later. When Lu Yi arrived at the meeting place, he found that there were 2 other people besides the middle-aged man. End of chapter. Chapter 1395. Apart from Lu Yi and the middle-aged man who posted the recruitment notice, there was also an old man and a young man with a crew cut. They exchanged names with each other. Lu Yi naturally reported Li Taibai's name. The middle-aged man was called Zhu Yuan, the old man was called Fan Yunhua, and the young man with a crew cut called himself Jiayu. No one bothered to investigate the authenticity of these names. It was common for cultivators to hide their true names and backgrounds when they traveled outside. After all, this was only a short-term cooperation. Even if it was the employer, Zhu Yuan, he would not be qualified to investigate the details of the people he recruited. Pay for labor, take the money to work, that was the way it was. However, what made Lu Yi slightly puzzled was that among the 4 of them, his cultivation was the lowest. The other 3 were all at the late stage of the constellation realm. Speaking of which, when Zhu Yuan recruited him, he didn't seem to have asked about his cultivation level. He offered $1,500 right off the bat. The price of the jade, and then everyone agreed on it in a few words. Perhaps this was his style of doing things, or perhaps his eyesight was outstanding, and he could tell that Lu Ye's cultivation was not low. No matter what, since he had already joined this small group, everyone would be on the same side before the end of the mission. Everyone is here, let's go. This trip will take about a few months, and I hope that the 3 of you can work together with me to overcome the difficulties. Zhu Yuan said. Lu Yi frowned. Don't you need to go to Fair Island? Although this was the first time he had taken on such a job, he had seen pigs run before. Especially after hanging out with Pu Ku for half a year, he had learned a lot from him about surviving in the myriad elephant sea. Under normal circumstances, Zhu Yuan had recruited 3 helpers like this to escort the supplies back to the Sky Spill Galaxy. Before leaving, he would definitely have to make a trip to Fair Island. Because he couldn't guarantee that he would confess. Whether the 3 people he recruited were good people or not, whether they would have any bad intentions halfway through, this required some special screening methods. Of course, this kind of screening method could not specifically distinguish between good and bad cultivators, but it could be used to determine the strength of a cultivator through certain comparisons. Fair Island was named Fair Island, and what it did was also Fair Island's business. There was a treasure created by the joint efforts of the Wanxiang Galaxy and many other galaxies. It was called the Zhongzheng Book. Recruitment notices were posted on Laika Island. Employers who managed to recruit people had the right to take them to the Zhongjing book. Just like now, Zhu Yuan could bring the three of them to Zhongjing Island and leave their aura imprints on the Zhongjing book. Through the aura imprints, he could check their past missions and see how many times they had been recruited, how many times they had completed, and how many times they had failed. He could even see the evaluations left by their previous employers. If this mission was successfully completed, Zhu Yuan could also do the same. Therefore, when he returned, he would leave a suitable comment based on the performance of the three during the mission. Of course, if the mission wasn't completed or if Zhu Yuan died halfway, then the three of them would inevitably have an additional number of mission failures added to their resume. This was also a stain that cultivators who made a living doing this were unable to erase. What was left on the Zhongjing book was not a name, so no matter what name was used, as long as there was no change in the aura, the Zhongjing book could be used to trace a cultivator's resume in the Wanxiang Sea. It could be said that the existence of the Zhongjing book greatly regulated and restrained the temperament of many cultivators. Which cultivator who was looking for a job on Laika Island didn't want their resume to be perfect? Who would be willing to leave a stain on their resume? It could be said that a good resume would make it easier for cultivators to find a livelihood. On the other hand, if the resume was too difficult, it would be easier for cultivators to find a way to survive. Also, no one would hire them. Even if there were, no one would bear to use them. In the Wanxiang Galaxy, there were many gangs that specialized in robbing and robbing. Some of them did it because of their nature, hoping to use this method to make a fortune, but there were also many people who couldn't find work on Zhaolei Island. Their records on the Central Official Book were too bad, and no employers were willing to hire them. They had no choice but to resort to robbing and robbing. Lu Yi had never left his aura on the Zhongjing book, so his resume was naturally blank, but that might not be the case for Fan Yunhua and Jianghu. Since they were transporting supplies back to the Sky Evolution Galaxy, Zhu Yuan must have a lot of good things on him. Bringing the three of them to the Zhongjing Island to leave their auras and investigate was also a kind of insurance. Lu Yi kindly reminded them to leave a good impression on his first employer. After all, he had to find a way to make friends with them in the following journey. Unexpectedly, Zhu Yuan shook his head and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. There are many people on the Zhongjing Island. Just waiting in line will probably take a few days. This batch of material consultation is a simple question. Ask, first page female general, Gong Ci is not allowed." He smiled and looked meaningfully at the three of them. "Also, I believe in my own judgment." Lu Yi reckoned that Zhu Yuan believed in his own ability more than his judgment. However, he faintly felt that something was not quite right. Whether it was Zhu Yuan's previous solicitation of him, or his current behavior, they all seemed too casual. In any case, if he were in Zhu Yuan's position and shouldered the responsibility of transporting supplies back to the domain, it was impossible for him to be so careless. Besides, even if they were in a hurry, a few days could not be delayed. This trip would take a few months. However, to people who were hired, their employer was the heavens and the earth. Whatever the employer said, there was no room for argument. Zhu Yuan summoned a planetary ship, and the four of them boarded one after another. After a short while, the planetary ship turned into a stream of light and flew into the distance. The journey was relatively boring. Zhu Yuan sat in the center of the formation to control the ship. He closed a wine jar and did not travel for the voyage. Tu Yunhua would occasionally take a sip. The young man, Jianghu, closed his eyes and rested. Since Lu Yi had nothing to do, he simply continued to deduce his kindred spirit rune. Of course, he did not completely immerse himself in it. Instead, he left a part of his mind to be vigilant. Since he had sensed that something was not quite right, he naturally had to be more vigilant. The planetary ship left the 10,000 Elephant Sea and flew into the depths of the starry sky. Lu Yi turned his head and looked back. Once again, he saw the shocking starry sky spectacle. Looking at it from afar, it seemed even more magnificent. 2 days later, Fan Yunhua suddenly said, "Master, this direction does not lead to the Sky Evolution Galaxy's insect path. Where are we going?" Hearing this, Lu Yi took out his star chart and compared it. He found that the direction was slightly off. Jianghu, who was resting with his eyes closed, also slowly opened his eyes and looked at Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan explained, "Naturally, we're going to receive the goods. This batch of goods is not with me for the time being." Lu Yi did not understand, but Fan Yunhua laughed softly. "It seems that there's something wrong with this batch of goods." He could not help but smile as he spoke. If there were no problems, they could have been delivered on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Only problematic goods would leave the 10,000 Elephant Sea and go to the depths of the starry sky. Zhu Yuan did not say anything. He just steered the spirit ship silently. Fan Yunhua also did not say anything. He had just said it casually. How could he continue to ask? Another day later, the planetary ship arrived on a desolate star. This desolate star was unusually harsh. Not to mention mortals, even cultivators with low cultivation bases would not be able to withstand it. Without sufficient knowledge, they could not deepen their knowledge. However, the four of them were constellations after all. They had strong adaptability. Zhu Yuan put away the planetary ship and led the way. Lu Yi and the other two followed closely behind. When they arrived, Lu Yi felt that something was wrong. Even if Zhu Yuan wanted to deliver goods to someone, he did not have to choose such a place. The starry sky was so vast. As long as there was no one nearby, it would be hidden. This place was more suitable for killing and robbing than delivering goods. Of course, it could also be that the other party was being careful. Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu also realized this. They exchanged a glance and became vigilant. It was common for employees to have designs on their employers. However, not all employers were good people. Some notorious fellows liked to use this method to lure people to a secluded place and kill them. They would lose both their lives and their wealth. They spread out their divine senses silently and checked their surroundings. They found nothing unusual. After a while, Zhu Yuan led the three of them to the foot of a desolate mountain. There was a dark cave in front of them. His expression suddenly turned solemn as he stood outside the cave. Behind him, Lu Yi and the other two felt their hair stand on end as their expressions became tense. There was clearly nothing inside the cave, and their divine senses couldn't detect any abnormalities, but no matter who it was, all three of them felt as if they were rabbits that had accidentally stumbled into a tiger's den. It was as if an ancient ferocious beast was crouching inside the cave, ready to erupt at any moment. As they looked around, the dark cave was not just dimly lit. Instead, it was filled with some kind of black substance. Lu Yi slowly raised his hand and grasped the hilt of the mountain pan saber. Beside him, Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu also silently circulated their spiritual energy, ready to attack. Along the way, Lu Yi had always felt that something was not right. At this moment he finally confirmed one thing. Zhu Yuan was not a good person. Transporting goods back to the Sky Spill Star system was just a pretense. His real purpose was to lure the three of them here. As for his purpose, it was unknown. However, there was a high chance that it was a common plot to kill and rob. There was only one thing that Lu Yi could not figure out. An existence that they could not detect even with their divine senses had to be stronger than Yu Yao. Moreover, it was not an ordinary Yu Yao. Would such a person be interested in the constellations? Robbing the constellations would not bring much benefit, so this matter did not make any sense. Regardless, the three of them had indeed fallen into Zhu Yuan's trap. No wonder this guy did not make a trip to the central island before setting off. As it turned out, it was completely unnecessary. They had been too careless. In the end, they were still inexperienced. In addition, Lu Yi was anxious to establish a good relationship with Zhu Yuan. After all, if they wanted to borrow the Sky Spill Star system, they needed someone to act as a guarantor. However, life was like this. There were always such accidents, and it was impossible to guard against them. "Let's go!" Fan Yunhua suddenly shouted. Activating some kind of secret technique, he transformed into a streak of blood-red light and fled to the left. At the same time, the sound of a sword rang out. Jia Yu merged with his sword and fled to the right. The two of them clearly knew that they were no match for the expert in the cave with their strength. Moreover, they were not familiar with each other in the first place, so there was no need to talk about sincere cooperation. At this moment, one of them fled to the left and the other to the right. No matter who the expert in the cave wanted to chase, the other had a high chance of escaping. Peak address, mobile terminal, thank you for your collection. Chapter 1396. It had to be said that both Fan Yunhua and Jianghu had a wealth of combat experience and escape instincts. Almost at the same time, Lu Yi made his move as well. He didn't choose to flee. If possible, he'd rather have Fan Yunhua and Jianghu cooperate with him. Both of them were late-stage Constellation Realm cultivators. With his help, they might be able to put up a fight against Yu Yao. However, this was clearly unrealistic. He didn't trust the two of them, and they wouldn't trust him either. Moreover, taking the initiative at a time like this was far more advantageous than passively fleeing. The Mount Pan saber left its scabbard and slashed at Zhu Yuan. At that moment, the dense darkness in front of them suddenly twisted. Immediately after, two black shadows shot out like two thick ropes, one from the left and one from the right. Fan Yunhua and Jianghu fled, Lu Yi attacked with his saber, and a black shadow appeared. Everything happened in an instant. Lu Ye's pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle tip, and his mind was greatly shaken at this moment. The Mount Pan saber didn't slow down in the slightest as it ruthlessly slashed down. Zhu Yuan's back was still facing him, his expression solemn. Given his strength, he must have sensed Lu Ye's movements. However, he clearly didn't think much of Lu Yi. He only circulated his spiritual energy to protect himself. However, how could the Mount Pan saber, which had been reinforced with divine edge spirit inscriptions, be blocked by simple protective spiritual energy? The saber fell, and his spiritual energy was destroyed. Zhu Yuan sensed that something was wrong, but it was too late to dodge. In his haste, he could only raise his arm to block. The sharp edge of the saber slashed at his upper arm, splitting his flesh and severing his bones. In that instant of deadlock, Lu Ye's brute force erupted. The saber spun like a crescent moon. Blood splattered everywhere, and a severed arm fell to the ground. Pained cries and screams rang out simultaneously. The one crying out in pain was Zhu Yuan. He hadn't expected to lose an arm in a moment of carelessness. The ones crying out in pain were Fan Yunhua and Jianghu. Lu Yi couldn't see what had happened to them, but he didn't need to see to know that their fates wouldn't be good. He didn't stop at all. After cutting off one of Zhu Yuan's arms, a sky full of blade shadows enveloped him. Zhu Yuanxing's cultivation was at the late stage of the star constellation realm. His strength was extraordinary. If they were to fight one-on-one, Lu Yi would have to expend a lot of effort to take him down. But in the end, he paid the price for his carelessness and underestimation. When Lu Ye's berserk saber momentum was unleashed, he could only parry and had no power to fight back. In just 3 breaths of time, Lu Ye's black saber pierced through Zhu Yuan's chest, directly piercing through his heart. If it was a cultivator below the constellation realm, they would definitely die from such injuries. However, Zhu Yuan had refined the essence of his body to the level of perfect bone marrow essence. Although the injury was serious, it was not fatal for the time being. He stabilized his body, not daring to move rashly. He stared at Lu Yi with eyes full of shock and disbelief. He never thought that a late-stage constellation realm cultivator like him would be able to grasp the gate of life of a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator like Lu Yi. He could clearly feel the spiritual power on Lu Ye's mountain saber. If he made the slightest move, his heart would explode into pieces. If it was a simple stab wound, he could still use his power to heal it. But if his heart exploded, he would definitely die. On the left and right, Fan Yunhua and Jianghu's screams were endless, as if they were enduring extreme torture. The 2 black shadows that had emerged from the cave slowly withdrew, as if a giant was retracting its arms. As they withdrew, the screams grew closer and closer. Lu Yi saw the 2 being dragged into the cave by the black shadows from the corner of his eyes. The deep darkness surged, and the screams disappeared. Along with them, the 2 people's vitality disappeared. At this moment, Zhu Yuan's expression was complicated. He was still wondering how he had been subdued by Lu Yi. Lu Ye's expression was just as complicated. He had previously thought that the one hidden in the cave was Yu Yao, but when she attacked and her spiritual power leaked out, he realized that his judgment was wrong. The one hidden in the cave wasn't Yu Yao. It was Rizhao. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he couldn't figure out why it was Rizhao. To Rizhao, Constellation Realm cultivators were like ants on the ground. Why had Zhu Yuan spent so much effort to lure the three of them to Rizhao? Was it purely for fun? That wasn't necessarily the case. The myriad constellation galaxy was filled with Constellation Realm cultivators. If this guy really wanted to have fun, he could have just gone out for a stroll. It would have been better than causing Zhu Yuan so much trouble. Moreover, the number of Rizhao in the myriad constellation galaxy was limited. Most of them were local powerhouses. Even if Rizhao came as a guest, he wouldn't stay for too long. Oh! An aged voice rang out from the cave, sounding rather surprised. It was undoubtedly because of Lu Ye's reaction and performance earlier. Even if Zhu Yuan had been careless in the beginning, it was still an astonishing matter for a mid-constellation realm cultivator to take him down in a short span of 3 breaths. Lu Yi could clearly feel a powerful divine sense observing him. This made him very uncomfortable. It was as if a venomous snake's tongue was constantly licking him. Under this kind of licking, any of his subtle movements or changes in his expression couldn't escape the other party's inspection. You have a good temperament and are very decisive in your actions. The old voice came from the cave again, as if appreciating him. Then, the voice turned playful. So, what do you plan to do next? Lu Yi lowered his eyes and said indifferently, I'll take him away. When we reach a safe place, I'll let him go. He originally thought that if Yu Yao was in the cave, he would find an opportunity to use the red talisman to kill her. During the early stage of the constellation realm, he had killed Qin Yuandai. Now that he was a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator and had been nourishing in his body for a longer time, the red talisman should be even more powerful. Killing Yu Yao shouldn't be a problem, provided that the other party wasn't too strong, but the other party was Rizhao. This plan wouldn't work. Lu Yi estimated that if he wanted to unleash the full power of the red talisman and reach Rizhao's level, he would have to at least advance to Yu Yao's level. Take the hostage and then talk about the terms. Not a bad idea. The old voice praised lightly. As soon as he finished speaking, a black ray of light shot out from the cave and directly hit the back of Zhu Yuan's head. Zhu Yuan's eyes suddenly dimmed, and his body fell limply to the ground. The mountain pan saber came out of his body, and the clothes around his chest were instantly dyed red with blood. Then, what about now? The voice from the cave became even more playful. Lu Yi lowered his head and looked at Zhu Yuan's corpse, speechless. The hostage was already killed. What was there to talk about? Although he didn't know who was in the cave, judging from the other party's behavior, it was obvious that he wasn't a good person. Zhu Yuan was definitely one of his people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought the 3 of them here. However, this old man didn't hesitate to kill his own people. It was clear that he was evil and cruel. Moreover, he was as strong as Rizhao. Even if Zhu Yuan was still alive, Lu Yi estimated that he wouldn't be able to use him as a hostage. Escape wasn't realistic. Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu were examples. With Rizhao watching them from such a distance, there was no way to escape. Lu Yi only hated himself for not being careful enough. If he had been more careful, he would have left imperial equipment outside in advance. Perhaps he would have had a chance to escape. But without knowing Zhu Yuan's destination, even if he had such a thought, where should he leave imperial equipment? Lu Yi waved the mountain pan saber in his hand and looked at the dark cave. He circulated his spiritual energy and brazenly charged in. Since he was going to die without a doubt, he might as well die fighting. It was better than waiting for death. That was a good idea. However, as soon as he rushed into the cave, Lu Yi knew that he had thought too much. The thick darkness around him was like a solid substance. When he fell into it, it was as if he had stepped into a swamp. His body stagnated and even his spiritual energy was suppressed. He couldn't use his divine sense. Not to mention killing the enemy, he couldn't even see what the enemy looked like or where they were hiding. The old voice sounded again. Your courage is commendable. Unfortunately, you overestimated yourself. How about this? Kneel down and kowtow 3 times, and this king will spare your life. In the darkness, Lu Yi gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. He swung his saber continuously, but he couldn't cut anything. The huge gap in strength made people feel especially powerless. As if this action angered the other party, the old voice coldly snorted, "Stubborn. This king wants you to kneel, so you have to kneel." A huge hot pressure suddenly fell from the sky. Lu Ye's body, which could still barely move, suddenly stiffened. It was as if he was suddenly carrying a star on his back. His body couldn't help but tremble. As the pressure increased, his expression became difficult. His eyes widened in anger, and his bones creaked. His face was full of blood, almost dripping blood. The old man was obviously slowly pushing his limits. Lu Yi only felt that his leg bones were about to break. If he forced himself to continue, the only result would be that his leg bones would be broken. However, he still forced himself to hold on. On the Wushuang continent, the deity Ocean from the Chaotian sect in Dingzhou was held hostage by Zhao Tianmu from the Qingli Dao world. If he could face death with equanimity, there was no reason that he couldn't. The cultivators of the 9 states might have all kinds of problems, but many people had a common trait, and that was, they were not afraid of death. This was because those who were afraid of death were almost all dead. Under the immense pressure, Lu Yi was gradually approaching his limit. It was at this moment that he suddenly exerted force in his legs and shot forward like an arrow from a bow. The expected scene of his leg bones breaking did not happen. Because almost at the moment he actively exerted force, the huge pressure on his body suddenly disappeared without a trace. Even the black fog around him was no longer so thick and condensed. In a full attack, he poured all his spiritual power into a saber and slashed it forward. The bright saber light pierced through the darkness and immediately disappeared. Lu Yi felt that his mountain saber was blocked by something. He wanted to pull out his saber, but he couldn't. He could only kick forward. This kick hit something, but Lu Yi didn't know what it was. Ha! Ha! Suddenly, there was laughter in the cave. The laughter was loud and deafening, sounding extremely carefree. Chapter 1397. In the dark cave, loud laughter rang out, and Lu Yi felt his eardrums tremble. The darkness around him receded like the tide amidst the laughter. Gradually, a dim light seeped in, allowing Lu Ye's vision to slowly recover. He finally saw what had blocked his mountain pan saber. It was 2 fingers. They were so light that he couldn't pull his saber away. He also saw clearly what he had kicked. It was the old man's face. At this moment, when the darkness dissipated, he was still in the posture of slashing down with his blade and kicking with his foot. His body was stiff. He did not know what the old man was laughing about. The only thing he knew was that if the old man wanted to kill him, he would have died 100 times over. The big foot blocked his view, so he could not see the old man's full face. However, the blurry outline gave him a strange sense of familiarity. A slight repulsive force came from the blade. Lu Yi took the opportunity to withdraw his blade and took 2 steps back. A slightly aged face with a beard and hair appeared in his field of vision. The old man was sitting upright there and sizing him up with a grin on his face. It was like a lion examining its prey, and it carried an indescribable feeling. Lu Ye's expression became surprised because he recognized the old man. He did not really know the old man, but he had seen him from afar. Nearly 3 months ago, when he and Puku were fishing on Fishing Island, a strong master had caused havoc in the Wanxiang Sea. He had killed a Wanxiang Galaxy's Rizhao on the spot. When he escaped, he passed by Fishing Island. Lu Yi had caught a glimpse of the man's face from afar. No wonder he felt a sense of familiarity. The old man in front of him was the one who had escaped from the Wanxiang Sea. After the incident, the Wanxiang Sea quickly calmed down and there was no movement after that. Although Lu Yi knew that the Wanxiang Galaxy would not let the matter go so easily, a Rizhao-level matter was not something a constellation could investigate. He could only guess that the killer had escaped. Otherwise, the Wanxiang Galaxy would have spread the news. He did not expect the old man to be hiding here. What was certain was that the experts of the Wanxiang Galaxy were searching for this person's whereabouts. The entire galaxy's airspace had probably been turned upside down. As for how this old man had managed to avoid being tracked down, that was obviously his own ability. At the moment, all the powerhouses in the myriad phenomenon galaxy probably thought that the old man had already escaped from the galaxy. Therefore, it would be a clever move for him to stay there. But what Lu Yi didn't understand was, this person was hiding well, so why did he ask Zhu Yuan to bring him here? At this time, he slowly figured out some things. The 4 of them had come together, and including Zhu Yuan, 3 of them had been killed. On the contrary, Lu Yi, the one with the lowest cultivation, had not died. If someone were to say that this old man did not have ulterior motives towards him, Lu Yi would not believe it no matter what. But why was it him? Just because of a quick glance on the fishing island? At that time, he didn't notice that the other party was paying attention to him, but the other party's cultivation was high, so it was normal for the other party to notice him when he was observing him. He probably didn't want his life. If he wanted to kill him, he didn't have to go through so much trouble. He also didn't have to risk exposing himself by staying here. It was even more impossible for it to be because Lu Yi saw his appearance. This old man didn't hide his head and tail, so there should be a lot of people who saw his appearance. But in an instant, Lu Yi thought about a lot of things, but he still couldn't figure it out. On the contrary, the old man's words made him instantly feel a little angry. 9 regions cultivators, your bones are still so hard. The old man looked at him with a smile, like an elder sizing up a junior, and there was even a hint of admiration in his eyes. Lu Yi tried hard to control his emotions, not revealing the slightest flaw, and only pretended to be puzzled. What is Senior talking about? This junior doesn't understand. You're not from 9 regions? The old man's expression remained unchanged, but even with his eyesight, he couldn't see any unnatural changes in Lu Ye's expression. Lu Yi slowly shook his head. I'm from the Wushuang continent. Even Tang Jun didn't know that he was from 9 regions, so how could Ri, who had only seen him once, know? But Lu Yi knew in his heart that since the other party dared to ask this, he must have seen something. But what flaws could he have that the other party could see? This wasn't a small matter. Back then, Yang Qing had specially warned him not to mention 9 regions when he traveled the starry sky in the future. When she brought him to the reincarnation tree, she even used the name of Jiutian to act. This was because the powerhouses of the previous 9 regions era had provoked too many enemies. Now, even if 10,000 years had passed, hatred was something that was difficult to eliminate once the roots were planted. Especially those powerhouses who had once attacked 9 regions, they were definitely extremely sensitive to the words 9 regions. So Lu Yi wanted to understand how the old man in front of him could determine that he was from 9 regions. Just as he was thinking about how to probe without leaving a trace, the old man smiled slightly. If you're not from 9 regions, why do you have the aura of the Tianji plate on you? Lu Ye's pupils shrank slightly, and he finally figured out where the problem was. So it was the Tianji plate. Every cultivator of 9 regions, even if they were rogue cultivators who didn't belong to any sect, had a battlefield imprint on them. This was because only with a battlefield imprint could one enter the Spirit Stream battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield to search for merits and battle achievements, and to communicate with others easily. For the cultivators of 9 regions, a battlefield imprint was a necessity. And the battlefield imprint was given by Xiaojiu. Xiaojiu was the combination of the spirit of the Tianji plate and the origin of 9 regions. The cultivators of 9 regions who had a battlefield imprint would naturally have the aura of the Tianji plate. According to the information Lu Yi had obtained, when the 9 regions era was besieged by many powerful enemies, the Tianji plate hadn't been born yet. The powerhouses of 9 regions realized that the situation was irreversible, so they worked together to create the Tianji plate. Borrowing the power of the Tianji plate, they moved 9 regions away from their original position and escaped disaster. For 10,000 years, they had been staying in a remote corner of the Jade Conch galaxy, not connecting with the starry sky. In other words, the enemies who attacked 9 regions probably didn't know about the existence of the Tianji plate. Only the native cultivators of 9 regions knew about this divine object. Thinking of this, Lu Ye's heart moved. He looked at the old man and said, "Senior." The old man's expression became serious. "I am Ma Bin of the Tian Continent's Human Emperor sect." Tian Continent, Human Emperor sect. When these words that he had heard before shook Lu Ye's eardrums, all of his doubts suddenly became clear. But he had never expected that one day he would be able to meet the powerhouses of the previous 9 regions era. Because according to the information Xiao Jiao had provided and the battle situation shown to him, all the cultivators of the previous 9 regions era who were qualified to participate in the battle had rushed into the starry sky to fight. In other words, as long as their cultivation reached the constellation level, they would have killed their way into the battlefield. Lu Yi didn't know the final result of that battle, and Xiao Jiao didn't know either. Because when the final battle began, the power of the Tianji plate was activated and 9 regions was moved away. But the situation was obviously not optimistic. With this region as a retreat, the cultivators of the previous 9 regions era could still retreat to recuperate and recover. Without this region as a retreat, it was a situation of fighting to the death. It was not impossible for them to be completely wiped out. Lu Yi had always thought that the powerhouses of the previous 9 regions era had all died in battle. Even if they hadn't died in battle, they should have died of old age after so many years. Because according to the current cultivation system, the lifespan of a constellation cultivator was 2,000 years, Yu Yao 4,000 years, and Ri 8,000 years. Those with long lifespans might be able to live for a few more years, but it was still very difficult for them to live for 10,000 years. Of course, this number was only in theory. In reality, as cultivators grew and survived, they would often fight with others. Injuries were a common occurrence. Even if they recovered, it would affect their lifespan. That was why Tang Jun was approaching the end of his lifespan. For Ma Bin to be able to live until now, it was unknown what means he had used and what price he had paid. Of course, it was also possible that the other party was lying, but Lu Yi felt that it was completely unnecessary. Ma Bin was such a powerful cultivator. If he really wanted to inquire about any information from him, he had many means. There was no need to lie that he was from the previous 9 regions. The most important point was that Ma Bin mentioned the Tianji plate. This should be a secret that only the cultivators of the previous 9 regions knew. In the current 9 regions era, only Lu Yi knew about it. To be safe, Lu Yi still asked, "What's the Tianji plate?" Ma Bin chuckled. "Don't pretend. I participated in the creation of the Tianji plate in the past. I'm very familiar with its aura. It's just that I haven't felt it for 10,000 years. When I felt it a few days ago, I thought I was hallucinating." There was no need to probe anymore. Lu Yi took a deep breath and straightened his face. He put away the Panshan saber and bowed to the elder in front of him. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect of the War Province greets Senior. "You're from the War Province?" "Good. There used to be a righteous sect in the War Province. They were all tough bones like you. There's a righteous sect in the War Province now, but there's no righteous sect," Lu Yi said. "Maybe it's a legacy from the past. After 10,000 years, many things have changed." Ma Bin sighed and gestured with his hand. "Sit." Lu Yi sat down in front of him obediently. He thought for a while and said, "Senior, did you notice me that day?" Naturally, he was asking about the incident on Fishing Island 3 months ago. Ma Bin nodded. "I noticed the aura of the Tianji plate on you. That's why I kept an eye on you. I had someone investigate you and thought of a way to lure you here." It seemed that Zhu Yuan was indeed Ma Bin's man. He was also acting under Ma Bin's orders. Lu Yi frowned and said, "In that case, Zhu Yuan isn't from the Sky Spill Star system. This trip to deliver supplies is completely false." Ma Bin said, "That's right. However, Zhu Yuan is very meticulous. He was afraid that you would be suspicious, so he specially recruited 2 more people. That so-called information about how one can reach Jade Conch by borrowing the path from the Sky Spill Galaxy and entering Yunsheng, it's fake. He got someone to spread it. However, it's true that one can enter Yunsheng by borrowing the path from the Sky Spill Galaxy. The cultivators of Yunsheng Galaxy also used this method to enter Wanxiang Galaxy." Chapter 1398. Lu Yi understood what was going on. How could things be so coincidental and go so smoothly? Chao Xiang had just found out about the Jade Conch when he went to Zhaolai Island. He just happened to see the cultivators from the Sky Spill Galaxy recruiting people. He smoothly obtained a reward from Zhu Yuanshang and accepted the recruitment. That was why Zhu Yuan was unwilling to go to Fair Island before he left. In his opinion, among the 3 people he recruited, the other 2 would definitely not survive no matter if they were good or bad. It made no difference whether they went to Fair Island or not. All of this was just a trap targeted at him. The ultimate goal was to lure him here to meet Ma Bin. To think that he even asked for 2,000 spirit jades from Tang Jun for travel expenses? Senior, you spent so much effort to lure me here. Do you have any instructions for me? Lu Yi composed himself and asked. Since the information he received was false, it was unrealistic to use Sky Spill to return to the Jade Conch. He had to find out more information. However, he did not know why Ma Bin asked Zhu Yuan to lure him here. Lu Yi was not worried that Ma Bin would harm him. However, it was very difficult for a constellation like him to interfere in matters of the sunshine level. He was afraid that he would fail to live up to his senior's expectations. I just wanted to see you. Ma Bin smiled and said, to tell you the truth, the plan to move the 9 regions 10,000 years ago was hastily decided. No one could guarantee that it would succeed, but if it didn't move, what awaited the 9 regions was the fate of being massacred. Therefore, we could only give it a try. However, no one had ever done something like moving a domain before, and most of them didn't dare to do it because it was very risky. If one was not careful, the entire domain would collapse, and all the creatures in the domain would die. Now it seems that it has succeeded? Seems like it has succeeded? If it had not been successful, there would be no 9 states now. Lu Yi was sitting here perfectly fine. This undoubtedly explains some things. Lu Yi nodded. It was very successful. In these past 10,000 years, although the 9 provinces couldn't be considered peaceful and auspicious, the cultivation atmosphere was still quite good. Cultivators thrived and the foundation of the domain steadily increased. Several years ago, it was promoted to a large domain. Ma Bin was a little surprised. Logically speaking, the 9 states should not have grown so quickly. Back then, the seniors were even mentally prepared for the 9 states to lose its qualification as a cultivation realm. Because of that plan, the realm's foundation was greatly damaged. It was very likely that the 9 states would not be able to recover. Then, its foundation would dissipate and the spiritual energy would disappear. It would become an ordinary realm with no cultivators. Compared to being massacred, this result was acceptable. No matter what, the living beings of the 9 states could continue to survive, but they could not cultivate. In the starry sky, there were many realms where no cultivators existed. But when he saw Lu Yi for the first time, Ma Bin knew that the 9 states had become a large realm because only large realms could give birth to constellation realm cultivators. Lu Yi said, the senior's prediction of the outcome of the 9 states was not accurate. This junior is unwilling to comment, but the foundation of the 9 states was indeed weak for a while back then. The level of the cultivators in the realm was not high. Now that it has developed like this, the Heavenly Secrets Plate has contributed greatly. Senior, you may not know, but the Heavenly Secrets Plate gave birth to an artifact spirit many years ago by chance. Moreover, it is an artifact spirit that has fused with the origin of the 9 states. It has a very strong independent mind. It has been developing under the Heavenly Secrets Plate's management. Ma Bin's eyes lit up. The artifact spirit of the Heavenly Secrets Plate is actually so amazing? This was something that the seniors back then could not predict. It was also an unexpected surprise. But then again, even if one's cultivation was as strong as sunshine, it was impossible to predict everything. At that time, the experts of the 9 states era had prepared for the worst and the best response. They did not have the strength to worry about the rest because they all rushed to the astral battlefield and died fighting. At that time, Ma Bin had just become a constellation realm cultivator. Because his cultivation was not high, he was not valued by the enemy. Instead, he coincidentally avoided a disaster. Seeing that Ma Bin was full of interest, Lu Yi said, if Senior wants to listen, can this junior tell you more about the 9 states? I want to listen. Ma Bin shifted his body into a more comfortable position and looked at Lu Yi with interest. Li could not talk about things that happened too long ago. He could only talk about some things that he had experienced and understood. He talked about the structure of the confrontation between the two camps in the 9 states. He talked about the Spirit Stream battlefield, the Cloud River battlefield, and the various checkpoints at the front line. He also talked about how Little 9 covered the 9 states' existence, allowing the 9 states to pass through the 10,000 years peacefully. He also talked about how Little 9 picked up various floating continents and broken realms from the starry sky and turned them into secret realms, allowing the cultivators of the 9 states to experience the various styles of the other realms in advance. There was also the insect disaster. For the first time in history, the two camps cooperated sincerely and worked together to kill their way into the insect race's secret realms and destroy their nests. There was also the mighty army that went on an expedition to the blood-refining realm. Like a divine army descending from the heavens, the blood race army was defeated and the humans of that realm were rescued. All these things were just small things in the eyes of Sunshine, but Ma Bin listened with great interest. He even showed a look of longing, hating that he could not participate in it personally. 10,000 years was a long time. Even someone with a powerful cultivation like him would feel homesick. However, after so many years, he had never taken the initiative to inquire about the 9 states, let alone search for it. He did not even know if the 9 states still existed. This was because he was too big of a target. Once he took action, he would easily be targeted by his enemies. If he brought disaster to his homeland because of this, he would not be able to absolve himself of the blame even if he died 10,000 times. The current 9 states was protected by the blood of countless ancestors of the previous 9 states era. He could not help the 9 states in any way, but he definitely could not do anything that would endanger the 9 states. When he heard that the 9 states foundation was improved by absorbing the blood-refining realm, Ma Bin's expression turned solemn. If that's the case, the 9 states is now a rapidly growing realm? It should be. Lu Yi nodded. Speaking of which, the 9 states was targeted by Sunshine not long after it became a large realm and connected to the starry sky. Ma Bin's expression turned cold and murderous. What's Sunshine's name? Where did he come from? From the looks of it, it seemed like he was about to attack and kill him. I'm not sure where he came from, but his name was Yuxin. However, Senior, don't worry. Back then, I found Senior Yang Qing under Little Jio's guidance and helped him escape. Yuxian was already killed by Senior Yang Qing. Yang Qing. Ma Bin was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Yes, he was an old friend of the sect leader. Because he made some mistakes, the sect leader sealed him away. It seemed like he was just going through the motions and was quickly released. In the end, when the 9 states' enemies attacked, this senior wanted to escape and help them at the most critical moment, but the sect leader did not allow it. He did not want to suffer with us. He was very strong, so it was normal for Sunshine to be killed by him. If that's the case, is Senior Yang Qing overseeing the 9 states' homeland? Lu Yi shook his head. After Senior Yang Qing escaped, he brought me to the reincarnation tree to participate in the battle for the deity ocean. When he returned, he left alone. As for where he went, he did not say. I don't know either. Ma Bin's eyes flashed, as if he had realized something. Speaking of the reincarnation tree, Lu Yi suddenly remembered something. Senior, the reincarnation tree has a clone in the 9 states. It should know that the 9 states is still intact and knows about the location of the deity ocean. Did you go there to inquire? Ma Bin shook his head. There are experts hiding outside the reincarnation tree. If I show myself, I will not be able to hide my tracks. I also wanted to go to the reincarnation tree to inquire, but unfortunately, I never had the chance. Lu Yi was slightly disappointed. If Ma Bin had asked the reincarnation tree to inquire about the 9 states, he might have known about the deity ocean's location. He would have been able to find out the specific path back to the 9 states. However, Ma Bin had never inquired about it. Then how did you come to the Wanxiang galaxy? Since you are here, how could you not know the way back? You even had to ask the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce for information. Ma Bin was especially confused about this. However, it was fortunate that Lu Yi had asked the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce for information. Otherwise, Zhu Yuan would not have had the chance to lead him here. It's a long story. Lu Yi sighed. He briefly explained how Wuxian had set up the formation that connected the Wushuang continent and the 9 states, and how the Wushuang continent had become an important training ground for the 9 states' true lake and deity ocean. Then, he talked about the invasion of the Qingli Taoist world, how he had used the red talisman to kill Yu Yao, and how he was chased by Tang Jun, which led to the formation of the insect path. Tang Jun and I were trapped in the insect path. In the end, we used a treasure to escape. When we came back to our senses, we were already in the Wanxiang galaxy. The insect path had just formed and was not stable, so we could not return. The twists and turns of the story surprised even someone like Ma Bin. As for the treasure that could help people escape from the insect path, Lu Yi did not elaborate, and Ma Bin did not ask. However, he was very interested in another matter. How did you get the dwarf race's red talisman? Logically speaking, the 9 states had just been promoted to a large domain, and everything in the starry sky was unknown. The dwarf race's red talisman was extremely precious, so where did Lu Yi get one? Senior, as you know, the 9 states had just been promoted to a large domain, and us constellations had begun to explore the surrounding starry sky. I accidentally saved a dwarf race, and then entered the Fangsuan mountain to do them a great favor. The red talisman was given by the dwarf race's sunshine. This favor should not be small. You are a person with a fortuitous opportunity. Ma Bin's face was full of admiration, and he seemed to have thought of something interesting. It must be very shocking to enter the starry sky for the first time, right? When I entered the starry sky for the first time, I was dumbfounded. Fortunately, my senior brothers and sisters led me, otherwise, I would not have been able to find the way back. Speaking of these interesting things, his eyes revealed a look of reminiscence. Unfortunately, 10,000 years had passed, and those familiar faces had long disappeared. Reminiscing now would only increase his sadness. He shook his head. Continue talking about you guys. The old man's affairs are gloomy, and you young people are lively. Chapter 1399. In the cave, Lu Yi and Ma Bin sat opposite each other and talked. Most of the time, it was Lu Yi who was talking while Ma Bin listened attentively. Ma Bin drank a lot of wine with a happy expression. A few days later, Ma Bin drank the last pot of wine and wiped his mouth. Okay, since 9 regions is still peaceful, this old man can be considered relieved. It's getting late, this old man should leave. As he spoke, he stood up. When he was sitting cross-legged, Lu Yi felt that his figure was majestic. When he stood up, he was even taller. Lu Yi didn't know where he was going and what he was going to do, but he couldn't help but ask, "Is there anything this junior can help with?" Ma Bin smiled. "You can't interfere with what this old man is going to do, and there is no need for you to interfere." Looking at the young and vigorous face in front of him, Ma Bin's expression turned solemn. He warned, "Remember, from now on, you don't know me, and I don't know you. You and this old man have never met before." They were all smart people, and some words didn't need to be said too clearly. If it weren't for the urgent need to know the current situation of 9 regions, Ma Bin wouldn't have asked Zhu Yuan to find a way to lead Lu Yi here. For people like him, even if this meeting was extremely secret, there was still a certain amount of risk. Now that his wish had been fulfilled, Ma Bin naturally didn't want 9 regions to have anything to do with him. The span of 10,000 years was completely divided into 2 eras, the former 9 regions era. Naturally, this matter should be done by the people of the former 9 regions era. There was no need to involve the latter 9 regions. Even if the current 9 regions encountered an irresistible strong enemy and were enslaved, it was better than being involved with him. Even before that, he had set a test for Lu Yi by putting pressure on him. If Lu Yi couldn't hold on at that time and really knelt down and begged for mercy, then after asking about the current situation of 9 regions, he would definitely kill him. Because of the particularity of 9 regions, such a greedy person who was afraid of death couldn't be allowed to be active outside, lest one day inadvertently expose the existence of 9 regions and bring disaster to 9 regions. However, Lu Ye's performance undoubtedly satisfied him. In such a situation, not only did Lu Yi not kneel down and beg for mercy as he wanted, but he fought to the death, which was very much to his appetite. In his opinion, the cultivators of 9 regions should be like this. They would rather die standing than live kneeling. As Ma Bin walked out of the cave, Lu Yi saw Zhu Yuan standing there perfectly fine. Not only was he not dead, even the arm that he had cut off had been reattached. With Zhu Yuanxing's late-stage cultivation, it was normal for him to be able to reattach a severed arm, but it was abnormal for him to be able to come back from the dead. Looking at it now, Zhu Yuan's death a few days ago was probably just a kind of trick. It was just that Ma Bin's move was too ingenious, tricking him. With his hands behind his back, Ma Bin turned his head and took one last look at Lu Yi. He patted him on the shoulder and said earnestly, "Live well." As soon as he finished speaking, his body slammed forward and directly crashed into Zhu Yuan's body. Like a wisp of green smoke, he disappeared without a trace. Even Lu Yi was amazed by such a wondrous method. He finally understood why Ma Bin was still able to hide here after wreaking havoc in the myriad phenomenon sea. With such a mysterious technique, it would be strange if Nicho of the Wanxiang galaxy could find him. Zhu Yuan summoned his star boat and soared into the sky. Lu Yi followed him with his eyes. This short journey had shaken him quite a bit. He really didn't expect that there were still experts from the previous 9 regions era who survived. He had kept Ma Bin's advice in mind, and he was even more aware that it was indeed not suitable for him to get involved. Ma Bin was currently free and unfettered. He had killed Rizhao in the Wanxiang Sea, and was still able to come and go freely in the Wanxiang galaxy because he had nothing to worry about. However, if he were to involve Jiuzhou with him, it would inevitably become his weakness and shackle, which would be extremely disadvantageous for Jiuzhou. After a few days of conversation, Lu Ye's impression of Ma Bin was that he was forthright and generous, not bothering about trifles. However, from the way this old senior acted, Lu Yi knew that he was not a good person. His temperament was also extremely evil and cruel. Although he was not a good person, he was still one of them. He turned back and returned to the cave. There were 2 dried corpses lying there. They were the pitiful Fan Yunhua and Jiayu. They were dragged into the cave by Ma Bin and instantly lost their vitality. Even their flesh and blood had dried up. At first glance, they looked like zombies of the corpse race. After searching for a while, he found a few storage rings on their bodies. Only then did he skillfully destroy the corpses. He was not in a hurry to leave. Now that the Wanxiang Sea had entered a period of silence, he didn't know what to do even if he went back. He might as well open the restriction locks on these storage rings and see if there was anything good inside. These 2 were late Constellation Realm cultivators. Their wealth couldn't be too shabby, right? However, Lu Yi knew that he couldn't place too much hope in this kind of thing. Cultivators who would go to Laika Island for work were generally not that rich. Lu Yi thought of Tang Jun again. Before leaving, he had told him the details and even asked him for travel expenses. If he suddenly ran back, would the old man think that he was cheating him of his money? Like storage bags, storage rings had restriction locks. However, for Lu Yi, who was proficient in the Tao of spirit tattoos, it was not difficult to unlock them. He already had experience in this aspect. After checking the rings one by one, he gained some things. It was similar to Lu Ye's expectations. Both Fan Yunhua and Jiayu had some wealth, but they were not rich. Their combined spiritual jades did not even add up to 2,000 pieces. Apart from that, there were all the spiritual pills for cultivation, some random materials, and a few spiritual treasures. If he took those spiritual treasures to the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce to sell, he could earn a total of 10,000 spiritual jades. Although he didn't want to return to the Wanxiang Sea, he still had to go. Although the Wanxiang galaxy was big, he really didn't know where else to go besides the Wanxiang Sea. Just as he was about to leave, there was a sudden fluctuation of spiritual power outside, as if someone was descending from the sky. Lu Yi hurriedly restrained his aura. It was not that he wanted to hide anything, but he was used to being cautious. However, the newcomer obviously also noticed this cave. With a chuckle, a figure suddenly barged in. In an instant their eyes met. Lu Yi coldly sized up the newcomer. When he saw the other party's face, he was slightly surprised because the other party's face was very young. Although cultivators all had their own ways of maintaining their appearance, and the higher one's cultivation level, the slower one's appearance would age. However, experienced people could still tell if a person was really young. Some people looked young, but the vicissitudes in their eyes could not be hidden. Some people were really young. The one in front of him was the latter. Lu Yi even suspected that this guy was not even 20 years old. He was dressed appropriately. Although he did not look luxurious, it was obvious that he came from a big family. His aptitude was undoubtedly very high. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to reach the early stage of the constellation realm at this age. In the 9 prefectures, young people of this age were basically still struggling in the battlefield of the Cloudy River. In comparison, even if he had an extraordinary background and did not lack cultivation resources, to have such a cultivation at such a young age, his talent was undoubtedly extremely outstanding. The young man was stunned at first, then he was extremely vexed. I can even meet people here? How unlucky! As he spoke, he turned around and walked out. However, after taking 2 steps, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He turned around, his young face showing a fierce expression. I'm warning you. You didn't see me, and I didn't see you. Do you understand? Lu Yi looked at him calmly. He had heard similar words twice today. Did you hear me? If you did, then nod. Otherwise, I won't hold back. As the young man spoke, he pinched his fingers, and a red light bloomed from his fingertips. It was a red talisman. With his early-stage constellation realm cultivation, he could probably only activate the power of a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. Even Yu Yao could not reach that level. However, a red talisman was still a red talisman. This made Lu Yi even more certain that this young man came from an extraordinary background. Ordinary people would not have such a treasure. Lu Yi glanced at the red talisman and nodded slightly. Only then did the young man reveal a satisfied expression. Smart. As he spoke, he left in a flash. After he left, Lu Yi packed up his things and stood up. He took out his planetary boat and left. He had to think about how to explain this to Tang Jun. In addition, Lu Yi was considering whether he should go to the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce to look for Chao Xiang again. The information was not accurate, but he had paid the spirit jades. Would the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce continue to investigate the Jade Snail Galaxy for him? However, after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. If he went to look for Chao Xiang, he would definitely ask about what had happened. Lu Yi could not explain it clearly. He would have to wait for a while. Following the guidance of the star chart, Lu Yi approached the Myriad Elephant Sea. However, he soon discovered something strange. The number of cultivators coming and going on his way had obviously increased. Moreover, judging from their posture, they seemed to be looking for something. Lu Yi did not pay them much attention. No matter what they were looking for, it had nothing to do with him. Until one of the starships stopped his star boat. It was a flying treasure used by cultivators to travel through the starry sky. In fact, there were 2 types of flying treasures. The first type was the planetary boat, which was similar to the silverfish and Lu Ye's current boat. The second type was the starship. The specter ship that Lu Yi had been to before was a starship. The biggest difference between a planetary boat and a starship was that it did not have the ability to attack. The former was purely used for traveling. It had good defense, but it did not have the ability to attack. If there was a need to attack, the cultivators on the boat would have to do it themselves. However, a starship had the ability to attack. Because it was equipped with offensive formations and offensive treasures as the formation cores, it looked more terrifying just from the outside. Of course, there was a huge difference in price. A starship was at least 10 times more expensive than a planetary boat. In other words, even the cheapest starship would cost 200,000 spirit jades. If the specter ship was in good condition, it would cost at least 1,000,000 spirit jades. It was not something that ordinary cultivators could afford. Only the realms and sects with enough resources could afford it. Chapter 1400. Back then, when little Jiao had shown Lu Yi the scene of the land of the 9 prefectures being besieged by various experts, Lu Yi had seen the shocking scene of starships of all shapes and sizes gathering in the sky. Although he had not been in the myriad phenomenon galaxy for a long time, he had seen some starships sweeping across the starry sky. If it was just a planetary boat blocking his way, Lu Yi could ignore it. After all, they were both using planetary boats. Even if his planetary boat was the cheapest one, the other party would not be able to forcefully stop it. However, it was a different story if it was intercepted by a starship. If it insisted on resisting, the starship might not be able to withstand an attack from the other party. After stopping the planetary boat, Lu Yi immediately sensed a divine sense spreading out. 3 figures walked out of the planetary boat opposite him. 2 of them stood on the left and the other on the right, blocking the possible escape routes of the planetary boat. The last person landed directly on the planetary boat. Lu Yi didn't panic, because in the myriad phenomenon galaxy, strategic weapons like starships generally belonged to the major forces of the galaxy. They wouldn't make things difficult for an outsider like him, so as to avoid ruining their reputation. The most likely reason was that they wanted to do something. Sure enough, after the late-stage constellation cultivator landed on the star boat, he stood still and cupped his fists towards Lu Yi. "Fellow Taoist, sorry for disturbing you." His tone was very polite. "What's the matter?" Lu Yi asked. The man was a little surprised. The young master of Che Ling Realm's Thousand Sunsets sect has run away from home again. We are under orders to assist in the search, so we want to check your planetary boat to see if it is hiding anything. Lu Yi waved his hand. "My planetary boat is only so big. You can check it yourselves." The planetary boat he bought was only worth 30,000 spirit jades, and it could only carry 2 to 3 people. It was obvious at a glance that it was impossible to hide anything. The late-stage constellation cultivator nodded. "Please forgive us for disturbing you, fellow Taoist. Also, I want to inform you that the Thousand Sunsets sect will reward you with 20,000 spirit jades if you can provide any useful clues. If you can bring the young master back, you will be rewarded with 100,000 spirit jades." It was true that the Thousand Sunset sect had offered such a generous reward just because the young master had run away from home. It was obvious that the Thousand Sunset sect was a sect that did not lack spirit jades. Come to think of it, the local forces of the Wanxiang galaxy relied on the mountains and the sea for their livelihood. With such a large Wanxiang ocean here, there was probably no one who lacked money. This is the young master's image, as well as some relevant information about his physical characteristics. As the late-stage constellation master spoke, he handed Lu Yi a jade slip. Lu Yi took it and looked at it briefly before nodding slightly. "I understand." Suddenly, he realized that the cultivators he encountered on the way back had most likely received the news and were searching for the young master of the Myriad Dawn sect. For any constellation, the 10,000 Sunset sect's reward was extremely generous. Just providing effective clues was worth 20,000 spirit jades. If they could bring that young master back, it would be worth 100,000 spirit jades. Compared to finding work on Zhao Lei Island, this was undoubtedly more attractive. "Sorry to disturb you." The late-stage star constellation realm cultivator apologized and was about to leave. Lu Yi muttered to himself for a moment before calling out, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." The man turned around and asked, "Is there something else?" Lu Yi said, "Since this young master ran away from home, he probably won't go back with others willingly, right? If we really find him, won't we have to fight him and subdue him with force? If we injure him—" The late-stage star constellation realm cultivator smiled. "Fellow Taoist, please don't worry about this. Senior Jiyan has already said that as long as we don't kill him or leave him with untreatable injuries, it doesn't matter how we punish him. Oh, Senior Jiyan is that young master's birth mother. She's also a Sunshine Realm cultivator, so fellow Taoist, you don't have to feel burdened." After a pause, he continued, "However, if you really want to fight with that young master, you still have to be careful because he has a lot of treasures on him. I heard that he also has the red talisman that Senior Jiyan gave him. If he activates the red talisman and kills you, you'll have died for nothing." Lu Yi nodded slightly. Different people have different lives. With a Sunshine Realm cultivator as his birth mother, He can indeed do whatever he wants. The late-stage star constellation realm cultivator smiled and left without saying anything else. After a while, he and his companions boarded the starship and left. Lu Yi stopped in place and pondered for a moment. Then, he turned around and went back the way he came. Although the image of the young master recorded in the jade slip was different from the one he saw on the desolate star, some of the characteristics were the same. Especially the cultivation. According to the jade slip, the young master's cultivation was at the early-stage star constellation realm. The young man he saw was also at the early-stage star constellation realm. Originally, he only suspected that the young man might be the guy who ran away from home. However, when the late-stage star constellation realm cultivator mentioned the red talisman, Lu Yi was almost certain that the young man he saw was the young master of the Thousand Sunset sect. As for the appearance, it was very common to have treasures that could change one's appearance. When Lu Yi was active in the 9 prefectures, he even bought some face masks. That young master had a Sunshine Realm cultivator as his backer. What kind of treasures couldn't he get? He also didn't expect that the young man he met by chance was actually a walking 100,000 spirit jades. Since the birth mother of the Thousand Sunset sect had said that as long as the young man wasn't killed or left with untreatable injuries, there was no need to hesitate. Moreover, Lu Yi also noticed that the young master of the Thousand Sunset sect had run away from home again. This meant that he had done this more than once. He probably had the experience of being beaten up and brought back. One day later, Lu Yi returned to the desolate star. With a glance, he saw traces of cultivators entering and leaving the desolate star. Obviously, they were looking for the young master. However, it was obvious that they didn't find anything. Ran away? Lu Yi frowned slightly. Since the young man ran away from home, it was obvious that he didn't want to be found again. Previously, he accidentally bumped into Lu Yi. Fearing that his whereabouts would be exposed, it was normal for him to leave quickly. However, at that time, Lu Yi didn't know about this at all. How could he have thought that he would capture him on the spot? Instead, he missed out on a windfall. However, since he was already here, Lu Yi decided to search for him. He flew over the surface of the desolate star at a low altitude. He spread out his divine perception and searched carefully. However, he didn't find anything. That young master of the Thousand Sunset sect called Chu Shun might have really run away. The desolate star wasn't big. With Lu Ye's cultivation at the mid-stage star constellation realm, it would take him at most 4 hours to search the entire place. He thought that there was no hope. Who knew that when he passed by a place, he would see some clues with a glance. This was the place where he chatted with Ma Bin previously. There was originally a cave here, but when he passed by it now, he realized that the cave had disappeared. There was no reason for such a big cave to disappear for no reason. Even if it was destroyed, there should be some traces left behind. However, in reality, there weren't any traces left behind. Lu Yi floated in the air at the original location of the cave. He understood that there was probably some kind of formation set up here to conceal it. Moreover, the method of setting up the formation was quite brilliant. Otherwise, the star constellation realm cultivators who came here to search wouldn't have noticed it. This meant that Chu Shun was hiding here. He was a smart guy. However, it was a pity that he was too smart for his own good. He naturally thought that Lu Yi wouldn't return after leaving. However, he didn't know that when Lu Yi saw him, he didn't know about the Thousand Sunset sect's reward at all. He lowered his head and looked down. He observed the structure of the spirit veins carefully. After a while, he saw a flaw. Lu Yi said softly, "Do you want to come out yourself, or do you want me to drag you out?" There was no response. Lu Yi didn't waste any time. He directly pulled out his mountain saber and slashed down fiercely. There was clearly nothing in front of him. However, when the long saber landed, a layer of ripples suddenly appeared. A protective light screen blocked Lu Ye's attack. An exasperated voice sounded, "You promised me before, but now you're back. Do you still have any shame?" Obviously, he saw Lu Ye's face. Lu Yi ignored him and continued to slash. To him, it wasn't difficult to break this formation. Although the method of setting up the formation was ingenious, it was still inferior to his. With the spirit veins of insight, The nodes of the formation could be seen clearly. After 3 slashes, accompanied by a cry of surprise, the formation collapsed. The other party obviously didn't expect that the formation he set up would be so weak. The original cave was revealed, and Lu Yi directly landed at the entrance. The exasperated voice became more and more manic. It even sounded fierce. "I'm warning you, don't come in. Otherwise, I won't be polite." Saying so, a mysterious light suddenly shot out from the cave. Lu Yi was caught off guard and was hit by it. His body suddenly stiffened, as if he was bound by some inexplicable shackles. "Ha ha!" Loud laughter rang out. As the voice got closer and closer, the owner of the laughter gradually appeared in Lu Ye's vision. It was the young man he had met before. He was holding a mirror in his hand, and the mysterious light was coming from this mirror. This mirror clearly had the power to slow down a person's movements. He first used words to lure Lu Yi into lowering his guard, then suddenly attacked. Sure enough, it was effective. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he was also a cunning guy. This was normal. If he was really an inflexible person, he wouldn't have run away from home. He walked up to Lu Yi and said proudly, "If you left, then you left. Why did you come back and ask for trouble? Just for a little reward? Tell me, should I kill you or not? After all, you found me. If I let you go, you'll definitely go to my mother to claim the reward." "You want to kill me?" Lu Yi looked at him indifferently. Chu Xin showed a difficult expression. "We have no grievances, so I don't really want to kill you. But letting you go is not appropriate. How about this? You become my subordinate and obey my orders from now on." Saying so, he took out a long needle-like treasure and poked it at Lu Ye's forehead. "Bear with it, it'll hurt a little. It'll be fine in a while." Lu Yi didn't know what this long needle was, but from what he said, it seemed that it could make Lu Yi obediently obey. Just as the long needle was about to poke Lu Ye's forehead, Lu Yi suddenly raised his hand and grabbed his wrist. Chu Xin's expression became stunned. "How did you? It didn't make sense." After being hit by his mirror's mysterious light, a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator would be unable to move for at least 10 breaths. How could he recover so quickly? Chapter 1401. Chu Xin was born in Che Ling Boundary's Thousand Sunset sect, and his mother was a sunshine powerhouse. Naturally, he did not lack cultivation resources since he was young, and he had many mysterious treasures on him. The mirror was called the Body Solidifying Mirror. As the name implied, the mystic light it shot out had the effect of freezing a person's body. Moreover, the mystic light shot out at an extremely fast speed. Unless the target was prepared in advance, there was no way to avoid it. Even Lu Yi had suffered a loss just now. Fortunately, after the mystic light entered his body, it was immediately burned by the talent tree, allowing him to regain his freedom. At this moment, he suddenly grabbed Chu Xin's wrist, shocking him. However, this guy's reaction was extremely fast. Before the stunned expression on his face disappeared, the long needle in his other hand trembled slightly. Like lightning, it quickly pierced towards Lu Ye's forehead. At the same time, Lu Yi bent his knee and slammed forward. Chu Xin groaned, and his body could not help but bend slightly. The long needle suddenly turned and pierced towards Lu Ye's temple. Just based on his reaction speed and adaptability, this guy far surpassed ordinary constellation cultivators. Obviously, he also had rich battle experience, which surprised Lu Yi. With his background, people who had reached the constellation realm at such a young age were usually people who only had cultivation and were lacking in other aspects. But now, it seemed that he did have some ability. Moreover, from the feedback of the collision of spiritual energy, the other party's spiritual energy was also extremely pure. In other words, this guy probably had the strength to fight with people above his realm. Coupled with his mysterious treasures, even a constellation realm middle-stage cultivator would not have a good ending if they were careless when facing him. But in the end, he met Lu Yi, who had also experienced hundreds of battles and was especially good at close combat. The long needle pierced towards Lu Ye's temple. This time, Lu Yi didn't dodge. Just as Chu Xin thought he was about to succeed, his vision suddenly spun. When he came back to his senses, he was already lying on the ground, like a dog eating mud. His lower back was held, and one of his arms was held in the opposite direction. He wanted to resist again, but the wrist holding the long needle was also grabbed by Lu Yi, and fiercely twisted, Chu Shen spat out the sand in his mouth and couldn't help but curse. He really couldn't understand who he had met this time. Even if his cultivation was a level higher than his, he shouldn't have been so powerless to fight back and be taken down. He quickly cried out in pain, "Ouch, ouch, ouch, let go." Since Lu Yi had taken him down, how could he let go? One hand clamped down on him, the other hand rummaged through his storage ring. He remembered that he had specially kept a large net-type spirit treasure for capturing people. When he had just arrived at Wanxiang Galaxy, someone had used it to deal with him. Lu Yi reached out his hand, the net. Chu Shen was like a fish in a fish. Trapped in the net, Chu Shen couldn't even move his hands and feet. His spiritual energy couldn't circulate smoothly either. His face turned green with anger as he shouted, "A warrior can be killed but not humiliated." Lu Yi summoned the star boat and threw Chu Shen into it. Then he jumped on and drove the star boat into the sky. He took out a star chart and compared it to the route to Che Ling realm. On the star boat, Chu Shen had been yelling at Lu Yi to let him go at first. However, when he saw that Lu Yi wasn't going to budge, he started to threaten Lu Yi again, saying that he would do something to Lu Yi after he returned to Che Ling realm. Lu Yi just ignored him. Seeing that they were getting closer and closer to the Che Ling realm, Chu Ming panicked and his tone softened. "Fellow Taoist, we have no enmity between us. Why do you have to make things so unpleasant? Didn't you capture me for the reward? How about this? I'll give it to you. You let me go and pretend you never saw me." Lu Yi, who was quietly swallowing spirit pills and cultivating, finally turned to look at him without saying a word. Seeing that there was hope, Chu Shen hastily said, "My mother offered a reward of 100,000 spirit jades, right? I'll give you 150,000. The starboat's speed suddenly dropped. Chu Shen beamed with joy. "A mere 150,000 spirit jades is nothing. Since you know my identity, you should know that I have the ability to take out so many spirit jades. However, I don't have so many spirit jades with me right now. I only have a few thousand spirit jades in total. I can pawn a treasure with you and come back later to redeem it." Lu Yi immediately lost interest and turned his head away. The starboat sped up again. To be honest, when Chu Shen mentioned 150,000 spirit jades, Lu Yi was a little tempted. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was inappropriate. Capturing Chu Shen and bringing him back to Che Ling realm to earn the reward was a Sunshine Realm cultivator's order. It was his rightful reward. However, if he secretly colluded with Chu Shen and let him go after capturing him, it would be fine if the news didn't spread. However, if it spread to Che Ling realm, he might offend the Sunshine Realm cultivator called Jiu Yen. Not to mention, Chu Shen wanted to pawn a treasure with him. Chu Shen's treasure must have been given to him by his birth mother. Who would dare to take a Sunshine Realm cultivator's treasure? Therefore, after thinking about it, Lu Yi felt that it was better to earn the reward honestly. Since the Sunshine Realm cultivator had spoken and the matter had caused such a commotion, he couldn't possibly go back on his word. Chu Shen was still tempting him with benefits. The price had already increased from 150,000 spirit jades to 200,000 spirit jades. It was not until another starship stopped Lu Ye's planetary ship, and the cultivator leading the starship discovered that Chu Shen had been captured by Lu Yi that he enthusiastically offered to escort him to the Che Ling realm in person. Only then did Chu Shen shut his mouth. If the cultivators in the galaxy hadn't discovered his situation, there would still be room for discussion with Lu Yi. However, now that the cultivators in the galaxy had discovered his situation, there was no room for discussion anymore. He stayed in the large net unhappily and glared at Lu Yi in annoyance. The Che Ling realm was considered a large realm in the Wanxiang Galaxy. Logically speaking, it was extremely difficult for a Sunshine Realm cultivator to appear in such a realm. However, there was more than one Sunshine Realm cultivator in the Che Ling realm. The main reason for this was the existence of the Wanxiang Sea. This space wonder had brought huge benefits to the entire Wuxia galaxy. Other cultivators had to search for resources everywhere to cultivate, but the native cultivators of the Wuxia galaxy didn't have to worry about that. With abundant resources, it was easy for cultivators to cultivate, and the probability of producing experts was naturally higher. Although the cultivators escorting Lu Yi to Che Ling realm didn't originate from this realm, they were acquainted with the people of Che Ling realm. Therefore, they had already sent word to them before they even arrived. Therefore, as soon as Lu Yi arrived near Che Ling realm, he saw a figure waiting quietly in the distance. Judging from the fluctuation of spiritual energy, it was Yu Yao. Moreover, she was a woman with an extraordinary figure. The starboat stopped not far away from Yu Yao. Lu Yi grabbed the large net that trapped Chu Shen, walked down and untied it. Chu Shen didn't run away. The main reason was that he couldn't run away now that he was here. With his head drooping, he walked forward and bowed to Yu Yao. Aunt Yu. Yu Yao, who was addressed as Aunt Yu, looked Chu Shen up and down. She patted the dust off his clothes, and a doting look appeared in her eyes. You didn't suffer, did you? I told you it was dangerous outside and you shouldn't run around. You didn't listen. Chu Shen's face turned bitter. I'm a constellation now. Aunt Yu glared at him. What's wrong with constellation? You're only 20 years old. You should cultivate obediently for a while. You can go out when your cultivation base has stabilized. Chu Shen looked embarrassed. Lu Yi found this strange. Perhaps this was the trouble of being born in a powerful force. After suffering a loss at Yujichi's hands, he felt that it was better to keep some spirit jades in reserve in case he needed them. Chapter 1402. In a quiet place on the fishing island in the Vientiane Sea, Lu Yi sat cross-legged and looked at the formation plate in his hand, deep in thought. It had been 2 months since he sent Chu Shen back to the Che Ling boundary and returned to the Vientiane Sea. In these 2 months, he basically stayed on the fishing island. The main reason was that he had nowhere else to go. There were inns on the Vientiane island where he could stay, but they cost spirit stones and the price was not low. Although Lu Yi had a lot of spirit stones in reserve, he was not willing to spend them on such meaningless things. During the quiet period, there were not many people on the fishing island, and there were many hidden places, so it was very suitable for a cultivator like him who had nowhere to go to stay. He found a place at random and set up a formation to become a place to stay. In these 2 months, apart from cultivation, Lu Yi continued to deduce the twin branch spirit pattern that he had not completed before. It was only completed today. He didn't lack the materials to refine the twin chi connecting branch array disc. With his previous experience, he could easily refine one piece. He slightly activated it and carefully examined it, and found that there were still some shortcomings. However, with his current attainments in the Tao of spirit patterns, it was impossible to continue to deduce it more exquisitely. He could only wait for his attainments in the Tao of spirit patterns to improve in the future. Compared to the formation plate he refined in the 9 provinces, the formation plate in his hand looked no different, but the range it could cover was undoubtedly larger and wider, so it could meet the needs of the constellation realm battles. According to his estimation, such a formation plate should be able to allow 5 or 6 people to fight side by side. 5 or 6 constellation realms connected to form a formation, and the strength it could exert was not to be underestimated. It could be expected that if this thing was released, it would definitely cause a scramble among the major forces. In fact, as early as during the quiet period, Lu Yi had thought about finding a way to make money. Otherwise, it would be difficult to meet his cultivation needs by just relying on the work on the Laika Island. However, in this unfamiliar place with no background, how difficult would it be to find a way to make money? Unless he had a skill. He was good at a few things, but besides fighting, he was best at the Tao of spirit patterns. It could be said that this small twin branch spirit pattern was his hope to continue his cultivation in the future, and he would definitely use it to accumulate a lot of wealth. Lu Yi could already predict how popular the item would be after it was refined, but at this moment, he didn't dare to casually take it out. At the end of the day, there was still a problem. Without a strong enough background, no one could support him. As the saying goes, a man's wealth is his own ruin. If this array disk were to be leaked, Lu Yi would naturally become a hot commodity, but it was more likely that he would be fancied by some great force and forcibly recruited. If such a situation really occurred, Lu Ye's freedom in the future would not be guaranteed. He would be under house arrest forever and would have to work like an ox or horse for the rest of his life to refine this array disk. According to the information he had gathered, there were no other treasures in the current cultivation world that could allow people to form formations at will other than formation talismans. However, formation talismans were extremely difficult to refine and were extremely expensive. Lu Yi had once experienced the power of formation talismans in the dwarf tribe's Black Abyss. Compared to the twin chi-linked branches formation disc, formation talismans were undoubtedly more rigid. This was because formation talismans were based on talismans. Once they were activated, they could only form one kind of formation. Unlike the formation disc, which was based on the user's will, there was no doubt that formation talismans were more rigid. In comparison, the materials used to refine the formation disc were much simpler and took much less time. It was clear which was better and which was worse. Of course, this was from Lu Ye's point of view. If someone else were to refine it, it might not be so easy. Disregarding everything else, the new twin chi-linked branches formation disc that he had deduced was even more complicated than before. If not for the talent tree, Lu Yi would not have been able to construct it so easily. The matter of the formation disc could only be temporarily set aside. He would see if there was a suitable opportunity to sell it in the future. He put away the newly refined formation disc and continued to cultivate. He had to make plans for the Jade Conch Galaxy, but apart from the myriad elephant chamber of commerce, Lu Yi could not think of any other way. He even considered going to the reincarnation tree and asking it about it. However, he did not do so in the end. The main reason was that he could not be sure how long it would take to travel from the reincarnation tree to the Jade Conch Galaxy. A few years or a dozen years was fine, but he was afraid it would take hundreds or thousands of years. If that really happened, he would want to cry but have no tears. Several days passed. While Lu Yi was cultivating, he suddenly felt a mysterious fluctuation of power coming from a certain direction. At first, he did not pay much attention to it, because there were constant disputes on the myriad elephant sea. People would often fight over the slightest disagreement, and the aftermath of their battles would sweep out in all directions. When he was cultivating here, he often felt the movements of people fighting, so he was not surprised. But gradually, he realized that something was not quite right. The fluctuation of power did not seem to be caused by people fighting. Moreover, the source was extremely vague. It seemed to be very close to him, but also very far away. Lu Yi opened his eyes and tried to sense it, but he could not figure out what it was. After a while, the mysterious fluctuation of power became clearer and clearer, followed by a deafening voice wrapped in boundless killing intent that suddenly rang out in his mind. Sharpening the blade and wiping the sword, who can compete with you? Hiding the blade and facing the sky, no one dares to be your enemy. Lu Yi abruptly turned his head and looked in a certain direction. That direction was precisely where the voice came from. Even though he was cultivating, the killing intent and fighting spirit in his heart couldn't help but be aroused by that strange voice. He wished he could find someone to fight right now. Lu Yi was secretly shocked. He did not know who the voice was, but just the voice alone was able to arouse his killing intent from so far away. This ability was beyond his imagination. Just as he was feeling puzzled, the sky above the 10,000 phenomenon sea was in an uproar. Many constellations, alone or in groups, transformed into streaks of flowing light and rushed towards the source of the sound, as if something good had happened there. Those who had starboats rowed them and called for their friends, while those who did not have starboats directly summoned fairies and rushed over. Lu Yi was completely confused by the scene. But then he suddenly remembered something and quickly took out his musical talisman. Just as he was about to send a message, the musical talisman vibrated. After checking it, he found that it was a message from Pu Ku. He was about to send a message to Pu Ku just now because he realized that it was related to something Pu Ku had told him before. The Constellation Hall is open. Do you want to go and join in the fun? Puku's tone was obviously excited and expectant. Let's go. Lu Yi replied concisely. Then, the two agreed to meet on Fishing Island. Lu Yi waited quietly. The Myriad Elephant Galaxy had 3 space wonders, and the first was the Myriad Elephant Sea. This was the source of the entire Myriad Elephant Galaxy's prosperity. It could be said that without the Myriad Elephant Sea, there would not be the lively Myriad Elephant Galaxy today, and there would not be guests from all over. But in addition to the Myriad Elephant Sea, there were 2 other wonders in this galaxy. The Constellation Hall was one of them. Some people said that it was a starry sky treasure that had yet to fully evolve, because it did look like a treasure on the surface, but it could not be taken away by anyone. Since ancient times, it had been entrenched in a certain part of the starry sky of the Wuxia galaxy, more like a starry sky wonder. Throughout the ages, this constellation palace did indeed possess some of the characteristics of a starry sky supreme treasure. That was why there were rumors that it was a starry sky supreme treasure that had not fully evolved. Most of the space treasures and space wonders were born when the world was first created. They existed for as long as the universe existed. Even now, there were many space wonders and space treasures in the process of being born. As for when they would be born and whether they would be born, no one knew. It was possible that something had happened to the Constellation Hall during the process of being born, causing it to be incomplete. The reason why it was called the Constellation Hall was mainly because only Constellation Realm cultivators could enter it. It could be said that every time the Constellation Hall opened, it was a feast for Constellation Realm cultivators. Lu Yi did not know much about the Constellation Hall. He had only heard Puku mention it casually when he was fishing with him. He would have to ask Puku about it later. A moment later, a big ladle flew over from afar. Judging from its shape, it was the ladle that Puku always wore around his waist. It was also a starboat, but its shape was slightly more unique. Lu Yi flew up and landed on the ground. He discovered that there was another person besides Puku. He had seen it before. It was a ghost from the Ghost Clan. Isn't this my heartfelt friend? When Ghost saw Lu Yi, she joked casually. Lu Yi had bought her fishing tackle and helped her solve her urgent need. However, this woman was also a pauper. The main reason was that she had gone bankrupt while playing with fish. As a result, she didn't have a planetary ship and could only take Puku's. Lu Yi seriously suspected that this woman was very ugly. Otherwise, there was no reason for Puku not to be tempted by such an enchanting woman. Lu Yi nodded at Spectre as a form of greeting. While Puku was on his way, Lu Yi began to ask about the Constellation Hall. After his explanation, Lu Yi finally learned more about the Constellation Hall. Generally speaking, space wonders contain many hidden dangers. Any space wonder, even Rizhao, would be in danger if he rashly entered. Take the 10,000 Elephant Sea as an example. Usually, there were countless cultivators moving around there. There was indeed no danger. However, the 10,000 Elephant Sea itself was the most dangerous place. No one dared to enter it casually. The Constellation Hall was different. Usually, it just stood there motionlessly with its door tightly shut. There was no danger. This could be considered the Constellation Hall's dormant period. However, every few years, the Constellation Hall would open. When the door of the Constellation Hall opened, it meant that it had entered its active period. At this time, cultivators could enter the Constellation Hall and act according to its various rules. They could continue to obtain some substantial benefits. Whether it was space wonders or space treasures, they all had their own unique rules or rules. It was these rules and rules that created the legends and reputation of space wonders and space treasures. Chapter 1403. The voice that Lu Yi heard previously was not a real voice. Instead, it was the resonance of thoughts caused by the mysterious energy waves when the Constellation Hall opened. In other words, the voice that Lu Yi heard sounded like that, but in other people's ears, it might sound different. Even the star beasts that did not have much intelligence could hear their own voice. When the majestic voice sounded, when the strange energy waves fluctuated, it was the most obvious sign that the Constellation Hall had opened. This created the spectacular scene of many constellations in the Wanxiang Sea and even the entire Wanxiang galaxy. The great ladle flew very quickly and steadily. The three of them nestled in the ladle. Although their vision was obstructed, there was a unique sense of peace. Pu Ku explained, and Gui Ling added from time to time. This allowed Lu Yi to gradually understand more about the rules of the Constellation Hall. After a few days, the great ladle slowly stopped. Lu Ye's divine telekinesis sensed clearly that the constellations that were hard to predict were gathered here. He immediately understood that they had arrived. The three of them came out of the ladle in a flash. Lu Yi looked up and saw an extremely shocking scene at a glance. In this starry sky, there was a huge palace. This was the famous Constellation Hall. It was named as a hall. From the outside, it was indeed a hall, but it was ridiculously huge. Its length and width were tens of thousands of miles, and its height was a few thousand miles. Outside the hall, heavenly pillars stood tall, giving off a boundless sense of majesty. Such a hall could not exist in any region. It was not that it could not be built, but that there was no need to build it. However, it had silently existed in this starry sky for tens of thousands of years. Of course, the Constellation Hall's size was only relative to the normal halls that people knew. As a starry sky wonder, its size was very small. Just compare it to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. If it was placed in the 10,000 Elephant Sea, it would at most be the size of a spiritual island. However, the strangeness and profoundness of a starry sky wonder could not be summed up by its size. From a certain perspective, although the Constellation Hall's reputation was not as good as the Wanxiang Sea, it was not far behind. There was a reason why it was so popular and loved by constellation cultivators. The hall was not solid. Instead, it gave off an ethereal feeling. It was as if the hall was not real, but a projection. Lu Yi finally understood why there were rumors that this thing had not fully evolved into a starry sky cardinal treasure. From the looks of it, it did have traces of a starry sky cardinal treasure. What was even stranger was that no matter which direction they faced the Constellation Palace, all they could see was the wide open door in the middle of the Constellation Palace. Usually this door was closed. Only when the Constellation Hall entered its active period would it be opened. No matter which direction the cultivators came from, they would all be facing the door. At this moment, there was a huge crowd outside the Constellation Hall. Lu Yi had never seen so many constellations gathered together. Although there were as many constellations as there were dogs in the myriad phenomenon sea, the constellations were all scattered due to the size of the myriad phenomenon sea. Unlike here, constellations from all directions had rushed over, and this was only a small portion. Some of the more impatient ones had already rushed into the Constellation Hall, some were still observing, and most were still on their way. It could be said that the appearance of the Constellation Hall had not only caused the constellations in the myriad phenomenon galaxy to boil over, but also the constellations of all the constellations that were connected to this place through the insect path. The wide open door was like the mouth of a beast, swallowing the figures that rushed in one by one and disappearing without a trace. "Let's go!" Ghost was more impatient. Seeing that Lu Yi and Pu Ku were still watching in a daze, she could not help but urge them, "What's there to see outside? You'll only know how exciting it is inside." As she said that, she grabbed one in each hand and rushed towards the door. The entire Constellation Hall was shrouded in a kind of hazy starlight, making it look ethereal and lofty. The mystery of the hazy starlight could not be seen from the outside, but when the three of them rushed into the area shrouded by the starlight, Ghost's figure clearly paused and she frowned. Not only her, but Pu Ku and all the other cultivators who rushed in were the same. It was as if they were suppressed by something in an instant. Lu Yi was very puzzled because although he could feel the suppression, it did not seem to have much effect on him, which made him puzzled. Putting aside their true strength in terms of cultivation, Pu Ku and Ghost were both at the late stage of the Constellation Hall, which was one level higher than him. It did not make sense for the two of them to be suppressed so obviously, while he felt like a cool breeze. Before he could figure it out, his vision turned black, and his entire person was shrouded in boundless darkness. The ghost's hand that was grabbing his arm had also disappeared. In this boundless darkness, he was the only one left. He did not panic because Puku had told him about this before. This was a process that all cultivators who entered the Constellation Hall for the first time had to go through. There was a name for it, and it was called leaving a name imprint. Simply put, Lu Yi needed to leave his name so that it would be easier for some follow-up investigations and sequencing. A spot of light lit up in front of him, illuminating the area within a radius of 10 feet. The light was like a candle flame, swaying slightly. Following Puku's previous instructions, Lu Yi raised his hand and touched the light. In an instant, he understood many things and understood the various rules of leaving a name imprint. It was basically the same as Puku's introduction. It seemed that even cultivators who knew nothing about the Constellation Hall would quickly know what to do after coming here. What he needed to do now was very simple. He just needed to leave his name and aura in this light. This way, the Constellation Hall would record it. He did not necessarily need a real name, and he could even give himself a name at will. He would definitely not use the name Lu Yi. After leaving the Jade Conch Galaxy, he had been using the alias Li Tai Bai. It did not seem appropriate to use Li Tai Bai. He felt that he was not inferior to others in the competition at the Constellation Realm. Therefore, if he really used this name and made a name for himself later, he would definitely attract the attention of many people, especially those big forces. When that time came, there would be no lack of trouble. The Constellation Hall was the place where Constellation Realm cultivators competed. It was also the place where many Constellation Realm cultivators relied on to make a name for themselves. The Wanxiang Galaxy was so big, and there were so many Constellation Realm cultivators. Whoever could make a name for themselves and amaze the world with a single feat would need a channel. Those Constellation cultivators who did not have any backing hoped to spread their wings in such an occasion and then be noticed and recruited by the big forces. The big forces were also keen to select the talents they admired in this grand occasion. Lu Yi was now all alone and did not want to be in the limelight. He was more interested in making a fortune in silence. Therefore, he had to use a fake name. How to name oneself was also particular. A name had to be either in line with one's personality or in line with one's ability. Lu Yi thought about himself. He had always been low-key and reserved, and he never acted ostentatiously. He was also a weapon cultivator who was passionate about wielding a saber and chopping with pure thoughts. Then the direction was very clear. With a thought, the light immediately recorded his name. Fa Wuzun. In the next moment, the light suddenly expanded and enveloped his entire person. Lu Yi faintly felt that he seemed to have some connection with something. He understood that the thing he was connected to should be the Constellation Hall. This was considered a success in leaving his name behind. The light slowly dissipated, and his vision blurred again. By the time Lu Yi reacted, he had already entered a large hall. The hall was very big, and there were many people. They were all Constellation cultivators who had entered from outside. This was, without a doubt, the interior of the Constellation Hall. From the outside, the entire Constellation Hall seemed illusory and unreal. When it was not open, cultivators could casually pass through it without any obstruction or risk. However, once it entered its active period and opened, many mysteries would be revealed. The hall here was only one of them. As far as the eye could see, there were about 2,000 people gathered here. Compared to the spectacular scene outside the Constellation Hall previously, this number of people was simply insignificant. Of course, those gathered here were not all the cultivators who had entered the Constellation Hall. There were many halls like this in the Constellation Hall, and this was only one of them. Lu Yi looked up and saw a black stone tablet standing in the center of the hall. 3 large words were written on the top of the tablet. Contribution list. There were no words on the tablet for the time being, but after a period of time, some names would appear on it. They would all be elites who performed well in the Constellation Hall battle. Those large factions also used this contribution list to select talents. At this moment, a cultivator flew to the front of the stone tablet. After sizing it up, he suddenly threw a punch. This punch was powerful and heavy. When the punch was thrown, the entire hall hummed, but the contribution list did not move at all. Not even a crack appeared. However, This cultivator did not believe in heresy. He probably saw that the material of the contribution list was not ordinary and wanted to take a piece to sell. He kept urging his strength, throwing punches like rain. After attacking for a while without any effect, he suddenly revealed his true form in anger. Shockingly, it was a ferocious beast that Lu Yi could not recognize. It opened its mouth wide and gnawed at the black tablet. Lu Yi silently turned his head and continued to size up the surroundings. In this hall, other than the conspicuous contribution list black tablet in the center, there were many doors that led to unknown places at the edges of the hall. There was one at every interval. There were already impatient cultivators who rushed into these doors and disappeared. No one knew where they went. Looking up again, a huge number 56 on the dome was clearly visible. This number 56 was undoubtedly a number. In other words, this was the 56th hall. Before Lu Yi came in, there were already 55 halls full of people. If one hall could accommodate 2,000 people freely moving around and not feel crowded, over 100,000 Constellation Realm cultivators had already come in these few days. And this was only the beginning. There would definitely be more Constellation Realm cultivators coming after hearing the news. He did not dare to say more, but for such a grand event, at least 1 million Constellation Realm cultivators would participate. Just thinking about it was an extremely terrifying thing. End of chapter. Chapter 1404. Looking around, he didn't find Pu Ku and Yu Ling's figures. Those two fellows had probably been sent to the other halls, so there was no need to look for them. In this Constellation Hall, there was rarely a need to take the initiative to team up. Most of the time, it was the cultivators who worked alone. He had familiarized himself with the various rules of the Constellation Hall from Pu Ku and Gray Ling, but familiarity aside, he still had to experience it for himself. Lu Yi walked straight to a door and prepared to explore it. He thought for a moment before putting away his mountain plate saber and changing into a set of loose-fitting clothes. Speaking of which, these clothes weren't his own. His own clothes were the type that fit close to his body and made it easier for weapon cultivators to fight. These things could be considered spoils of war. Who knew which unlucky bastard it belonged to? The loose-fitting clothes added a scholarly and easygoing air to them. He stepped out and walked into the door. At the same time, he activated the thousand-faced spirit inscriptions and changed his appearance. Since he had a fake name, he naturally had to change his appearance to prevent people who knew him from seeing through his disguise. Otherwise, if everyone knew that Fa Wuzuan was Li Taibai, then his disguise would be meaningless. As though he had passed through a thin membrane, some information inexplicably appeared in his mind. Lu Yi checked and found that the information pointed out what he needed to do next, the type of venue he would enter, and even the name of his opponent. It was very comprehensive. The source of the information was obviously the Constellation Hall. When Lu Ye's vision recovered, he was already standing on a floating continent. This should be a starry sky. Stars twinkled all around him, and there was also a dazzling sun in the distance. The floating continent wasn't small and was big enough for a Constellation Realm cultivator to move about. Lu Yi appeared at the edge of the floating continent. He immediately saw a person standing on the other side, about 50 kilometers away from him. It was a constellation called Xinjiang. This was his opponent this time, and this was also the simplest and most direct battle on the arena. There were all kinds of battles between cultivators in the Constellation Hall, and arena battles were just one of them. Generally speaking, when cultivators first entered the Constellation Hall and weren't completely familiar with the place, they would have to go through a few arena battles before they had the chance to encounter other scenes. Of course, the cultivators had no choice as to what they would encounter. Everything was governed by the rules of the Constellation Hall. On the surface, Xinjiang looked like a young man about the same age as Lu Yi. His cultivation was also at the mid-stage. This was also the hidden rule of the Constellation Hall when arranging opponents. They would try their best to arrange cultivators with similar cultivation levels together. Only then could they compete. However, if a person only had cultivation but no strength, the rules of the Constellation Hall would adjust his opponent accordingly, and vice versa. All in all, The rules of the Constellation Hall were very mysterious and complicated. Over the years, the Constellation Hall had been opened many times. Generations of cultivators wanted to study the mysteries of this hall and find some rules from it so that they could benefit from it. However, they never found any valuable clues. 100 miles away, Qin Jiang stood still and glanced at Lu Yi from afar. He didn't take him seriously and began to familiarize himself with his new body. At the same time, he probed his surroundings. Lu Yi was doing the same thing. After all, this was the first time he was involved, and there were many things he needed to understand. On this point, the two who were arranged to be each other's opponents had a tacit understanding. Soon, Lu Yi discovered that he was completely fine. He was definitely here with his real body. At the same time, he also probed the range of this arena battle. This was the location of the floating continent. When he tried to fly out of the floating continent, he didn't succeed. There was an imperceptible barrier shrouding the surroundings, so he couldn't fly out at all. As for whether this was a location in the real starry sky or an internal space of the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi didn't know. He reckoned that the latter was more likely. On the other side, Qin Jiang had already circulated his spiritual power and moved his body to rush over. Judging from his attire and behavior, he clearly wasn't a magic cultivator. As for which sect he belonged to, Lu Yi couldn't figure it out. However, no matter which sect he belonged to, apart from magic cultivators, the other party needed to close the distance between them. Without any hesitation, he launched a spell technique. It was the fire dragon art, which he hadn't used in a long time. When the light lit up, Qin Jiang still had a look of disdain on his face. There was a reason why the Constellation Hall arranged the arena battle between the two of them was 50 miles long. This was because a mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivator couldn't reach this distance. Under normal circumstances, only a late-stage Constellation Hall cultivator could use a technique that could reach 50 miles and barely cause some damage. Thus, a 50-mile arena battle was enough for two mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivators to use. Qin Jiang naturally thought that Fa Wuzuan was just showing off. However, this kind of demonstration didn't have any practical effect other than wasting one's spiritual power. However, when the swaying fiery dragon pounced in front of him, Qin Jiang was shocked. He hurriedly steadied himself. With a furious roar, his qi and blood surged, and he threw a punch forward. This guy didn't look burly, but he walked the path of a body cultivator. He didn't choose to dodge, because dodging was meaningless. Cultivators could control spiritual power outside their bodies when they were at the Cloud River tier, let alone at the Constellation tier. Even if he could dodge the fiery dragon for a moment, Lu Yi could continue to control the fiery dragon to chase after him. The flames exploded, and the fiery dragon disappeared. Qin Jiang only felt a scorching heat envelop him, and his body couldn't help but sway. His face was filled with shock, because at this moment, he was more than 70 miles away from his opponent. This kind of attack range was not something a mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivator could possess, especially when the opponent's technique didn't weaken much even though it was so far away. In other words, this Fa Wuzuan's attack range was far more than 70 miles. It could be 50 miles, or even farther. Looking at the big picture, Qin Jiang immediately understood that he had encountered an incredible opponent in this first battle. Just as he was about to adjust his body and attack again, in his field of vision, another fiery dragon arrived, followed by a second, a third. After the three fiery dragons, there were also a lot of messy spell techniques mixed in, and they looked like fireworks of different colors. What the F***ck Qin Jiang couldn't help but curse, but he was someone who had cultivated to the mid-stage Constellation Hall, after all, and naturally wouldn't admit defeat so easily. With a roar, he summoned his own protective spiritual treasure to protect himself, his face full of humiliation. For a body cultivator, being forced to use a protective spiritual treasure right from the start was undoubtedly a very humiliating thing. Facing the many techniques, he rushed forward like a wolf. The further he went, the greater the pressure. When he was 50 miles away, he couldn't go any further. As Lu Yi unleashed another round of techniques, a sky full of light shrouded his body. When the light dissipated, Qin Jiang was already gone. He wasn't dead, Lu Yi could feel it. He just admitted defeat and left. In the competition in the Constellation Hall, you were allowed to admit defeat. As long as you shouted when you felt something was wrong, you would be able to leave in a breath's time. Most of the time, your life was not in danger. Of course, there were also those who shouted too late and died in vain. After the first battle, Lu Yi waited patiently. A ball of spiritual light suddenly appeared out of thin air and fell on him, enveloping his entire body. This was the winner's reward. The spiritual light contained extremely pure starry sky energy, which could be easily refined and absorbed by Constellation Hall cultivators without any harm. This reward was the reason why countless Constellation Halls enthusiastically participated in this grand event. This was because no matter how low one's cultivation was, as long as one won a battle here, there would be benefits. Otherwise, why would so many Constellation Halls be so eager to come here? Every time the Constellation Hall opened, many Constellation Halls would be accompanied by the fall of many Constellation Halls, including many monstrous geniuses from top domains. This reward was one of the important reasons for Lu Yi to participate. Another reason was that he had been cultivating behind closed doors for too long. Ever since he came to the Wanxiang Sea and advanced to the mid-stage Constellation Hall, he had basically not fought with anyone. For cultivators, blindly increasing one's cultivation was not enough, especially for someone like Lu Yi. Ever since he stepped onto the path of cultivation, he had been fighting with humans, the insect clan, and the blood clan. It could be said that his previous cultivation was basically a path of slaughter. Suddenly losing the opportunity to fight with others, Lu Yi was really not used to it. In particular, there were guests from all over the Wanxiang Sea. There were all kinds of major races, and it was a good place to experience the means of each race. However, he could not just randomly pick a passerby to spar with them. That would only offend them for no reason. The sudden opening of the Constellation Hall was undoubtedly a rare opportunity. By participating in this grand event, he could openly spar with different Constellation Halls, experience their strength, and feel their means. Lu Yi believed that after this Constellation Hall battle, even if his cultivation did not increase, his knowledge and experience would be greatly enriched. Sensing the spiritual light enveloping his body, he could sense the purity of the energy within. Lu Yi activated the power of his talent tree and quickly absorbed it completely. Not bad, the effect was about the same as devouring 10 spirit jades. He had a huge advantage in this aspect. Even if an ordinary Constellation Hall won, it would probably take 2 to 4 hours to refine and absorb this energy. However, he completed it in a dozen breaths. The remaining time was enough for him to participate in more battles and obtain more benefits. Furthermore, with every victory, one would gain a point. That was the purpose of the points ranking. The cultivators would be ranked according to the number of points they obtained. Before the Constellation Hall closed, all the cultivators on the points ranking would be able to obtain additional rewards. This meant that Lu Yi, who had the innate skill tree, would have a far greater advantage than others in terms of absorbing and refining the profound light of victory or the number of chips he obtained. This was because his speed and frequency of absorption were something that others could not match. The moment the spiritual light on the surface of his body disappeared, Lu Yi returned to the hall. However, when he looked up, he did not appear in hall number 56 this time, but hall number 63. There was no difference, just a different location. Without stopping, Lu Yi turned and walked toward the door at the side. End of chapter. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.